Good evening. Welcome to the July 30th meeting of the Yakima School Board. Before we start the proceedings, I have a few announcements to make. We offer Spanish interpretation services from Jorge with Language Connection. If you need translation assistance in person, please check with Jorge for a device. And Jorge, please translate this information.
Si alguien necesita de la ayuda de un intérprete, tenemos el sistema, los radios para hacerlo. Aquí está. Gracias.
Gracias. We also provide live streaming for this meeting. The link can be found on our webpage under Board of Directors or by going directly to www.ysd7.org/boardmeetings. If you wish to make a public comment this evening, there are actually three options available for you tonight. The first option is for the public hearing on the preliminary budget only. Then there will be an option for commenting on agenda items. And the last option, which comes toward the end of the meeting, is for all other topics. In order to speak tonight, you will need to sign two forms, a sign-in form and the guidelines form, and those are available at the table in the back of the room. If you are interested in watching past meetings, you can find them on our webpage's YSD YouTube channel. Barb, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett?
Here.
Director Rice?
Here.
Vice President Villanueva?
Here.
And President Walker?
Here.
Director Navarro Jr. is excused.
Now will you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? And accompanying the pledge is July's character word, enterprising, marked by an independent, energetic spirit and by a readiness to act, having or showing initiative and resourcefulness. O en español, emprendedor, marcado por un espíritu energético, independiente y por una disposición a actuar, tener a demostrar iniciativa e ingenio. My apologies to native speakers. I do my best. Next up, we have our land acknowledgement.
Today, the schools of the Yakima School District rest on the ancestral lands of the 14 confederated tribes and bands of the Yakima Nation.
Hoy las escuelas del Distrito Escolar de Yakima descansan en las tierras ancestrales de las 14 tribus y bandas confederadas de la nación Yakima.
The people of the Yakima Nation inhabited more than 12 million acres.
La gente de la nación Yakima habitó más de 10 billones de acres.
Across Adams, Benton, Chelan, Douglas, Franklin, Grant, Kittitas, Klickitat, and Yakima counties.
En los condados de Adams, Benton, Chelan, Douglas, Grant, Franklin, Kittitas, Klickitat, y Yakima.
Today we honor those native peoples who are tied to the land through history, legends, and culture.
Hoy honramos a estos pueblos originales que están vinculados en la tierra a través de historias, leyendas y culturas.
We acknowledge the descendants who live in the world today.
Reconocemos a sus descendientes que viven en el mundo de hoy.
We thank the caretakers of this land who have lived here and continue to live here since time immemorial.
Agradezcamos a los guardianes de la tierra, quienes han vivido aquí y continúan viviendo aquí desde tiempos inmemoriales.
An acknowledgement is a simple, powerful way to show respect.
Un reconocimiento es una manera simple y poderosa de mostrar respeto.
And a step toward correcting the stories and practices that erase Indigenous peoples' history and culture.
y un paso hacia la corrección de las historias y prácticas que borran la historia y la cultura de los pueblos indígenas.
It also honors the truth.
También honra la verdad.
As a school district, we will continue to build upon our relations with the Yakima Nation.
Como distrito escolar, continuaremos fortaleciendo nuestras relaciones con la nación Yakima.
And thank you to our students. At this time, I'd like to pause for a moment of silence to honor the memory of Robert Harold Nick LeCure. Nick was a longtime employee of the Yakima School District and served in a number of roles. Those of you that have been around for a number of years will remember Nick. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. And a more detailed obituary is available in the board docs. This evening, we are opening a public hearing for the preliminary budget for 2024-25. I will gavel in this hearing, and then there will be an opportunity to, after our presentation, there will be an opportunity to make comments or ask questions. Mr. Cooper, please walk us through the preliminary budget.
Thank you, Director Walker, members of the board. Pleasure to be here this evening. Members of the audience, as I've said before I give these presentations, some terms will be very financial and clinical and are not a representative of the employees they may or may not affect because, again, I will be speaking sometimes in very generic, I won't say generic, specific financial terms that may only apply to the budget. They're not a reflection of sometimes the feelings we have about repercussions of the finances. So just to tee that up for you. And then this budget is being presented per state statute. Every school district in the state that adopts a budget and must adopt a budget by August 31st of each fiscal year must have a public hearing. This public hearing was advertised twice, 2 weeks prior in the publication of record, which is the Yakima Herald, and fulfills all legal obligations in that area. This is going to be a meeting of firsts for me, and I'll tell you why here shortly. I did some math on my presentation as I begin, and this is the 22nd budget I presented to boards of directors. As an employee, I've also done an assisted districts with another 15 or 20 around the state in all different forms and fashions and presented to the board of directors. This will be the first preliminary budget that I recommend you do not adopt. The budget needs some more work and more reduction. So that is a first for me. I'm going to take you through the hearing. But again, since this is a deficit budget, is one that I believe we need to have more work on and continue to bring back future reductions. So that's a first in my career where a budget gets to this stage, and I would not recommend it for adoption. And that is because we have not met our financial requirements quite yet. So I'll get to the presentation, but I wanted to begin with that. Fine print. This is a thank you and accolades first to the board of directors for your patience and perseverance as you govern through difficult times. You are often not given compliments by either side. So I do want to thank you for your hard and volunteer work. Superintendent Green, again, being the leader and my boss, I want to thank you for your foresight and the difficult times we've traveled to together as well. And as you can see, the community, most importantly, for passing recent levies, that puts us in a lot different position. Had we not passed those measures, we would be in much more dire straits than we are currently. I'm not going to thank myself. That would be weird, even though it's on the slide deck. And then administrators and staff district-wide, when you reduce budgets, it's a community effort. It hurts everybody around the community, and then as the ripple effects occur when you change people's lives. So thank you for those that have continued to be here and engaged and part of the process. I do really appreciate it. And I know that the board and the cabinet do as well. And then lastly, my staff, you were here. Thank you for your tireless work as we've tried to reduce the budget throughout the year and continue to make changes. And then human resources, which effectuate a lot of the work that we do, or I do financially, and we model numbers and move staff and they're often the connection back to the people and the organization. So we do greatly appreciate that as well. So let's talk about where we're at. We talked about these facts and figures in the work study, which was now several weeks ago. So as discussed, beginning fund balance is at $8 million originally in 23-24 as it's created. So I have been your CFO now for 2 budgets. First of which had a $14 million deficit, and now I'm bringing you a $3 million deficit. I believe we have hit the bottom finally, and we are now going to bounce our way back up. The goal is to have a budget without a deficit and start to rebuild our reserves. So to that end, as we discussed in work study, estimated beginning fund balance is about $8 million. Current revenue, just under 287, and we'll get into some comparisons of prior year, and then expenditures of 290.6. We have a transfer out for debt service, and you can see we have a current operating deficit of $3.3 million, leaving a fund balance of only $4.6 million, well below the district's or the board's 5% threshold, and also too low for our liquidity reason, for liquidity and cash flow, which we'll address later in the meeting. The other funds are compared as well in the same form and fashion. And for those watching or listening, you can see as we go from left to right, ASB, or the Associated Student Body Fund, those funds are budgeted and created by the students and their advisors. They submit those budgets to us annually, and then we roll them up. So those are all the schools across the district rolled up into those total numbers. And you can see that they are in a positive position as well. ASB over the last few years has been more difficult for school districts given the statutory changes, and we often fundraise less and charge for less, and then have to spread resources in a different form and fashion than historically happened. Debt service is basically the principal and interest on your outstanding debt. Similar to if you had a mortgage, that would be your mortgage fund if you had an isolated. So that is for debt that was taken out for the rebuild of 2 comprehensive high schools, if I recall, Eisenhower being one of them, the modernization work at Davis. So that's the outstanding debt for those projects. Capital Projects Fund, the beginning fund balance is just $1.5 million. Those remaining funds predominantly are YV Tech or the skill centers, as they have capital projects funds. The district had capital projects funds in the fund this cycle. As we rounded out the Davis Auditorium, we had made a transfer from the general fund using ESSER money to round out Davis. And of course, that project is complete, and you are all in there for Stanton's graduation. So those funds will be fully expended and out of capital projects. And then Transportation Vehicle Fund, or the TVF, is for the purchase of school buses, and or occasionally you can get approval from the legislature or the state OSPI in this case for a major rebuild, so a transmission or engine, potentially a chassis. Those have to be approved. So those aren't for the operation of school buses, but just for the purchase of school buses. Any questions on the fund overview? Okay. We're going to bring this slide back because it demonstrated where we have been in staffing levels and enrollment and where we are now. The enrollment decline, since this is the same budgetary enrollment projection we used for the 2024-25 reduction in force meeting in March. You can still see our enrollment is 11.4% down from its peak. Now, however, last presentation, those 2% of importance, the now 1.5% of CERT staffing increase, prior cycle was 9.5%. So you can see we had a reduction in the increase. Oh, that's a weird brain teaser, but we have fewer certificated staff than we had prior cycle, as was demonstrated by a reduction in force. Additionally, that classified staffing number, which is still 7% increase, even though our enrollment was down 11, last year was at 18.2. So we are moving our staffing levels in a direction that more aligns with our enrollment. However, we are still staff heavy when it comes to our peak enrollment and our current staffing levels, which we'll talk about later. So any questions on the historical enrollment and FTE levels? Here's the graphical representation of student FTE. which was provided to you on the prior slide. You can see we have been in steady decline over the last few cycles. Our enrollment picture mirrors what you have seen around the state and nationally. I would also point out Yakima was similar to the state and the national level, where we added staffing during enrollment decline, particularly driven by the pandemic. So if you look at national data sources, you can see the same phenomenon that we've discussed at this boardroom several times, where districts were still staffing, and it's still the same with if you look at the state staffing levels and state enrollment, it's the same, almost the same arc as we had. Staffing up, even though enrollment was in decline. Now, what you're also seeing state and nationwide is the big reset of districts' finances and staffing levels, which we are in the middle of. Similar to Evergreen, Vancouver, North Shore, Seattle, Issaquah, Bellevue, you name it. All the large districts that I have worked with over the years, they are in year 2 or 3 of that work and have continued to reduce. So again, what we are going through is not only a phenomenon, but something that we're seeing nationwide and is affecting all local governments as well, besides the school districts. Here's a graphical examination of our more volatile and smaller enrollments. So we do have positive enrollment. So our ALE has grown over time. I think the work that you all did during the pandemic made those programs more attractive to a lot of kids.
Can you define ALE for those that are watching?
Sorry, Director Rice, you're right. We have a lot of TLAs or 3-letter acronyms that we should probably explain. So ALE is an alternative learning experience. And it was put into statute in the late mid-teens, I think. I can't remember. Some of my career moves together. And it provided other alternatives for students that wanted to be at school only a certain time or have a contact with teachers and a learning plan and have more freedom. So when ALE first came out, it was a mess from an audit standpoint. Districts all around the state got in trouble for ALE and how they calculated that. But over time, those programs have become more clear and their goals more articulated by the state. And then school districts have come behind that and done a lot of good work with kids that may likely not be in our school system at all. So that is a bright spot and provides flexibility. So last cycle, I overprojected enrollment, which occasionally happens when you're in my field of work. However, it does have a detrimental impact to finances. One place where I missed was running start numbers from year to year almost doubled, which was a strange phenomenon. And we've done some research into that, and we still don't know exactly why they went almost from 100 to 200 in a cycle. Some of it is obviously choice, and oftentimes I've seen in my career it's finances. You know, when there's an economic downturn or potentially, then there's a lot more kids that go into Running Start. Those are awesomely affordable and cheap college credit. My son's a Running Start student, been very successful, and so to that end, that has been growing as well. And then our open doors, which when you see open doors numbers, they have a mixed meaning, right? When the student gets to open doors, that means they are at one of their final places to try to graduate and move forward. But at the same time, when we see kids, as you all saw kids graduate out of open doors, like most we've had in our recent tenure, then there's also positivity there. So those are our kind of small, more volatile pieces of enrollment, but nonetheless, very important. They are funded at lower rates. Running Start is a pass-through. So if we budget 200 students in Running Start and they don't come in, then that flow-through just won't be realized because we won't have the expense or tuition payments out to the community colleges. So general fund budget comparisons. So I always find this slide valuable. I wish it was a little bigger for you all. Some highlights. So if we look at enrollment, so the top portion of the chart is enrollment and the bottom portion is budgeted expenditures. So K-5 enrollment, as we've talked about, we have larger classes leaving the system and inbound smaller. By smaller, I mean 1,300 on the top end and around 1,000 or so inbound. So there's a swing of approximately 300 kids each year when more go out the top than come in the bottom. That's reflected in our enrollment projections. As you can see, Enrollment is projected downward 2.7% for elementary. Middle is down 3.6. And you notice high school is up 1.4. Now that is 70 kids. That is because they are enjoying about the last large class to come through. I think there's one more of a significant size before it starts to drop into that 1,100 student figure. So their enrollment will decline as they begin to have fewer students inbound in their cohorts. So it's coming for high schools. As you can see, it's at the elementary and middle school levels. We also noted, we talked about alternative learning. You can see that I budgeted it conservatively. It's down 4.5%. Now, open doors is down 32%, but historically it runs between 70 and 80. Last year we had a spike of 110. Again, if we need to add additional staff and it comes in above projection, we will do that, but it currently is projected at 75 versus the current 110. Now let's talk about expenditures. So we went through a very large budget reduction process and made significant reductions to the operating fund. You can see year over year, and this is where it's worth looking at comparisons. Remember, we had a 3.7% IPD or COLA inflationary increase. So even when you cut, you're going to still have upward salary movement just based on increases in IPD. And then remember, we also had negotiated increases. YEA had another 0.5% on top of that, and other groups had some sprinkled percents as well. So there were labor costs above the state IPD. But again, we are still down in overall salary and benefits by 1.2%. Supplies and materials, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. You can see it's down 18%. Now, some of that is driven because we had some reserve accounts from ESSER in supplies and materials. Additionally, though, we have cut MSOCs. We have cut supplies material budgets around the system and tightened them up. So that is part of the reduction you're going to see. And we'll likely see more of it going forward. Now you get to a point where cutting your material supplies and operating costs becomes foolhardy because you know that you're still going to spend a certain amount of money for lights, insurance, paper, just to keep things running. So there's only so much you can push those expenditures down. However, we are working to provide that balance to the district and you all because, again, people that we have working here still need supplies and materials and services, but at the same time, if we are reducing people, we need to take the hardest look possible at non-employee costs, which we have done and will continue to do. You can see contractual services actually increased. I will tell you why. The district has in its budget 2 reserve accounts. So we balance when we create reserve accounts. These balance on revenue and expenditure. So it's not a slush fund. Okay, it's capacity. It is. We have $3 million in additional expenditure and capacity and we have $3 million in revenue. So they balance out. They just provide capacity in case of enrollment growth above projection, unanticipated grants, things of that nature, so that you have the expenditure authority if need be to move forward with that. That is partly why it increased. The other thing is we did have an increase in utility rates and insurance went up $1 million. So I want to say that again. Our insurance liability premium for the school district went up $1 million from one year to the next. That is the second year in a row when our increases have been very close to $1 million. And I'll use this opportunity to say that school districts around the state predominantly operate in 2 insurance pools. We are very close as a school district system to not be able to be insured. And it becomes greater and greater risk each year. And we will see where that goes. But again, we continue to pay larger and larger amounts in our liability insurance. And it's an issue that's facing school districts around the state. Overall, though, you can see our total expenditure budget is down over 4 point. What is that 4 point? You can't see. I circled the number. I might need my readers soon. Sorry, Dr. Green. 4.8% from one budget cycle to the next. So often you will hear the government doesn't actually reduce their budgets. We talk about reductions. Your budget is down from one year to the next. There was an actual reduction in your expenditures. So this is an interesting slide as well. This is the comparison of your staffing levels, budget to budget. So not actual to budget, but last budget that I presented to you in 2023-24, and the 2024-25 budget. You can see that we're down 6.7% in certificated staff and 9% respectively in classified staff for 7.8% total. So we have continued to downsize and reduce staff based on lower enrollment. And of course, that is something we're going to have to continue to do as we align lower enrollment with diminishing resources. Are there any questions on the staffing level? Here's our enrollment as a graphical representation. As we discussed earlier, you've seen this in several forms and fashions. This is the gen ed versus special education enrollment figures. Our special education enrollment has remained fairly flat as a percentage. That bottom percentage special ed is one way to measure your SPED versus general ed enrollment. And you can see we've ranged from 15.7 to as low as 14.18 or so. So we haven't moved much, 1.5%. This next year's budget has us 15.8%. So right around historical averages. Any questions on those comparisons?
What is the ceiling that the state will fund to? Does that make sense?
Yeah, we are below the ceiling. We are below the ceiling currently. They've raised it to 15 and change, 16. I have to look. Last I did the calculation, we were below the threshold, but they did just change it again this last session for the few districts that were still above it. So there might be a remaining district. I'll have to look, but last time I calculated, Martha, we were now getting full funding for those students. Now, this is an interesting graph, and I want to go through it slightly in detail because special education has continued to be a cost center that drives a lot of expense. And that is not unique to Yakima. We were able this cycle to save about $1.5 million in special education because of two things. We moved our contracted nursing and para services from contracted labor in-house to our rank and file community members. So to that end, we have little or no contracted paras unless they're on an emergency basis, and little or no contracted nursing. So those two moves saved us about $1.5 million in special education. So those were positive moves. We still are going to battle, I think, our overload costs and, of course, the other unknowns when it comes to special education when you have high-cost students. The district has made improvements on safety net. So when I first got here, there was no safety net. 22-23, I think we got a couple $100,000, and then we just got $1 million this last round. So, and the only way you get those funds is if your IEPs are in compliance and you also have measurable goals, and then they are read by the State Safety Net Oversight Committee, and they determined that in this case, we had submitted, I think, for 1.8 million and received 1 million of the requests. So every year we are getting better, and we will continue to do so. And that was a very large staff effort from the special education department. And there are times when financially, like special education can be very difficult to manage, but in this case, they did a great work as a team to be able to provide that safety net funding. So we're grateful for that. But we continue to expend a large amount of our resources and local levy on the gap in special education. And I do not foresee that improving dramatically over time. It is something that, as a young CFO, I was in a district where we sued the state of Washington. I've been to the Supreme Court and I lost. However, when we did sue the state of Washington, it did change the safety net program significantly and how it was calculated, and we did access more federal funding. However, the discrepancy that we've had in special education funding has plagued us and has plagued Martha, I know, her whole career on the board. And it's something that is a federal problem. Remember, IDEA should fund 40% of the cost of special education. They do not even close.
Do we have a breakdown of the percentage funded by the state and then the percentage funded by the federal government?
I have the percent broken out by local levy up there. Do I have it?
I don't know. For special education. I
do. Maybe I'm not on this slide deck, though. But we can easily provide that to you, Martha, if
It
not.
would be helpful when speaking with our federal
Yes.
legislators to let them know how underfunded we are?
I will give you that very disappointing pie chart to provide them.
Thank you.
Because it has been a federal issue for, administration
Ever since
after
I've been on the
administration.
board.
Correct. And so it is something that we forget. We blame the state, and we know that it's difficult to fund locally, but we forget that if IDEA, if they're meant to fund 40%, they should be giving us 16 million, not 3.8. That's a big difference on a $40 million spend. So that would be what should happen, but it does not. And regardless of administration, it has not been an investment point for the federal government.
Question before you move
Yes.
on. Earlier on this slide, or maybe it was a previous slide, I think you responded to Martha's question that I thought you were talking about the special education funding threshold increased and that we were under that. And so I'm confused then by now we're saying that we're not funded enough. So
Yeah.
I'm missing something.
Two prongs. So there was arbitrarily placed. We were in the few the few states in the nation that had a cap on the percentage of special education students that the state would fund. That was 12.7% for 20 something years. It has been ratcheted up over time, and now it's 15 or 16%. I'll look. So when Martha asked me, are we below that threshold? Yes, which means we're getting full funding for every special education student we have is getting state funding. Some districts run percentage of like 20% where they would be.
We're not getting reimbursed all of our special education funding. We're just getting paid the per student.
Yes.
For more special ed students, which is, I assume, a higher rate, but it's not enough to cover all of our expenses. Is that right?
Correct. If you were ever talking about this at a function, and you were on the net, basically special education students are funded double the rate of a gen ed, and they're all gen ed first, but then they get the additive funding. So every special ed student is a general education first, and then if you're provided, if you have a valid IEP, that's a compliance, then you get basically double the BEA funding for the year. So if it's $10,000 for basic ed and your special education funding is approximately double, you can get $20,000 or so per student. Now you don't get that funding historically. Like if we had 15,000 students, let's just say it was 10%, and so it's 1,500 kids. If it was kid 1501 to 1,700, and let's say you had more, the state wasn't going to fund any of that. They weren't disqualified from your federal counts, but you would not get any more state funding. So they literally hard capped you. So there's districts in the state that run special education percentages in the mid-20s, which is very high. Nationally, wherever you would be, it would be high. But again, they would not get full funding because they would be above that state threshold. There's a bright spot. Well, part of the chart's a bright spot. So as you can see, we have an increase of nearly $5 million from one calendar year levy to the next, which is awesome. Thank you, community and board. We enjoyed approximately half of that increase this year because remember, the levy is calendar year and we are fiscal year September to August. So we have 2 calendar years and we blend them at 45, 55, wherever they come in at. So we enjoy about half of that. Next year we'll get the remainder because the full 5 million will kick in. What has not been good and will continue to decline is levy equalization. So we've talked about this before. Is as property values rise, and Yakima property values have risen considerably in the last 5 years. I always ask you, but 5 years, I'm thinking you're talking like 40% in 5 years. And that's assessed value. That wouldn't even be market value. So as our assessed value and the assessed value of the state changes, then we qualify for less levy equalization. Isn't that awesome? So levy equalization is a tax relief program, for lack of a better description, that the legislature has had for many years for districts that are property poor, which means it costs us a lot more to raise money than it does somebody in King County because they have a bigger property base. So then so voters don't have to pay double or triple the per thousand rate they would in another community. The legislature says, and they did, we're going to have to do something called levy equalization. And we're going to buy down your tax rate and give you the state portion so you can raise the equivalent, which is great. And you need to have a past levy to have levy equalization funds, which we do, thankfully. However, those funds are continue to decrease. And if you model them out just using the OSPI model, you're down to 10 or 12 million in 27, 28. So we'll see what the legislature does with LEA. It's popular usually for both parties, both sides of the state as well, East and West get it. And so it's usually supported by the legislature. However, the current formula and the way it is, it will continue to provide us less revenue each cycle, which is not great. The fund balance trend. So you can see we talked about the 2023-24 estimated fund balance of about 8 million. If we do not make any additional reductions, and you say, Mr. Cooper, I would like to adopt this preliminary budget, we would have a fund balance of what, 1.6%. That is not sufficient for industry standards, for liquidity needs, and it's something I would not recommend we do. So required by the state is the 4-year forecast. This is a linear extrapolation for the most part. It is done to satisfy a legal requirement first and foremost. And again, it gets very difficult for the CFO and the finance office to determine what future boards are going to do. Right? So I can only intuit what I would like to happen. You can see that there's a decrease in expenditures and a rebuild of the fund balance in the 4-year extrapolation. We know, and I know that's obviously future actions of future boards, future budgets. But again, it is required by state statute that we do a 4-year look forward. And that's what you're getting from 24-25 through 27-28. Again, the requirement for the 4-year forecast for all the other funds, same extrapolation requirement. You can see for capital and debt in particular, debt service we do know because we know what our outstanding debt's going to be in those calendar years. So those are approximate figures, are very close to actuals. Capital projects, again, we have expended the capital projects fund for the most part, and we just keep enough capacity if there's going to be any spend down. And the same for transportation. And then ASB, as we discussed, is student-led, student-budgeted, managed by the adults. And I will say it's usually the most laborious $700,000 or $600,000 in the system because many hands and many lessons go into all those funds, from school stores to fundraisers, etc. I would not trade the experience for our kids for anything. However, when you're in the finance department and you have school stores and car washes and fundraisers all over the world, it gets to be a little nerve-wracking. However, again, we had I don't know if I won't steal your thunder, but we had another clean audit this cycle. So we just finished our accountability audit. Because I know during the budget reductions, there was a question on audits. We get audited annually for several hundred hours. And we had a clean financial and federal audit the first time. They split the engagement into 2 parts. And last 2 or 3 weeks ago, we received a clean audit for accountability and compliance to our statute and state laws. So 2 for 2 on the audit reports, and I don't know when of those are going to be in the record, but I thought I would take the time to provide that information. Another legal disclosure. I'm sorry, the state keeps adding these every budget year. This is the MSOC disclosure. For those of you at home, MSOCs are material supplies and operating costs. For those of you who are very old, they used to be called NERCs, non-employee related costs. The state likes to have a 4-letter acronym apparently instead of our 3-letter acronym. But again, what the requirement is here legally is for you to provide the revenue amount you're getting from the state on how much you're spending. And then if you didn't fully expend their allocation, which never happens, then you would have to explain to them what you're doing with those funds. You can see that we spend $11.6 million more currently than the state's allocating in MSOCs. So we should not have a problem meeting the legal requirement. Okay, so the SWOT analysis. The budget work we have undertaken in the last 12 to 18 months has been difficult, sometimes heartbreaking, but unfortunately needed. The organization has to have a balanced budget. We have to have liquidity enough to be able to make payroll and our legal obligations, which means we need to continue to reduce because we're not there yet. Again, the weaknesses, we have declining student enrollment. Of course, we are playing a little bit of offense, going to open enrollment, which we hope will fill in some of our enrollment cracks, right? If you have certain ratios at each grade level and you can place kids to round out your ratios and growth, that'd be great. And if we can offer meaningful program and childcare opportunities to those folks out of the side of the district and inside the district, it's something we want to do. Inflation has continued, and I know all of us, those of us listen to the media, you'll hear quips about inflation. Inflation's down. Inflation is not growing as rapidly. Usually what they're saying is inflation isn't growing as rapidly as it's been in the last 36 to 48 months. We are coming off the highest rates of inflation not seen since late Carter administration, early Reagan administration, the late 70s, early 80s. And that's starting to decrease. But however, those price points now are set. So those inflation on HVAC, inflation on anything we buy, I mean, costs come down occasionally on commodity prices, and they have been falling. But for the most part, our supply chains for big expensive items are still long and still very costly. And it's the same with wage inflation too. So when the legislature gives a COLA of any significance, it's really tough on Yakima. And it's tough on a lot of districts because usually there's a 65-35 split between what the state funds and what the district has to pick up the remainder of the tab. We're about 60-40 here, maybe even worse than that, because we have so many federally funded employees, and none of those federally funded employees get a COLA. That COLA increase for them has to come out of the levy. So every time the legislature gives us a COLA or an IPD, it costs us $1 million per percent last I looked. And I'll do the math again, but it continues to drive, and that ripple continues to grow. That, and remember what else happened in recent years is SEB. School districts were asked to expand health coverage for employees that historically have not had health coverage. That came at a huge unfunded cost of school districts, which is part of our current financial issue as well. So expanded healthcare coverage, wage inflation, enrollment decline, etc. That's where we find ourselves, which means we are in a battle for our finances, which we'll win, but it is going to be difficult. And the work we've already started has to continue. Again, we have a weakness in liquidity. We'll talk about that later if we get to the state apportionment advance. Again, we still have opportunities. Not everything is doom and gloom. We still have awesome programs, and most of them are intact and running well. We have opportunities, though, to continue to find efficiencies. So as we go through the system, and we have rebuilt many large systems, staffing, we're now working on procurement, supplemental contracts. So we continue to revise and rework our process and procedures, which provide efficiency, which is another term for cost savings when you're the CFO. And then, of course, we still have opportunity, and we still need to do the work on alignment. Our enrollment is less. Our staffing is still greater than historical levels, so we still have that alignment work to do, which means we need to match our workforce with our customer base if you're in the private sector, which means number of students to our staff, both our educational staff, whether it be certificated staff or classified. The threats, continued enrollment fluctuations. Again, enrollment is projected down, which needs to be. We have a dependence on the general fund for large maintenance projects. So any unforeseen HVAC, roof, etc., those can be millions of dollars, and we would have to go either borrow, short-term borrowing, or we'd have to go to the state for grant program, etc. So we have no additional capital proceeds if there's a calamity. If it's not covered by insurance, we then have to figure out how to finance the work. And that's what happens when you don't have any capital funding, which puts pressure on the operating fund. So every time, instead of buying books with $2 million, you'd be like buying a roof. And both are important. Both serve different needs. And so that is one pressure we have of many facing us. The last slide's questions, but I'm going to make a statement, and then please feel free to take my questions, or I'll answer your questions. See, the operating deficit is about $3.3 million. I would recommend that the board make additional reductions in staffing and MSOCs to eliminate that budget deficit as quickly as possible. So this is not a budget I would recommend that you adopt. I would recommend that you direct Dr. Green and I back do more work and bring you back a balanced budget. I know that seems odd, but this is a public hearing. This is not a place for me to sell you what's created in my office. It's for me to provide you transparency and accountability, which is the goal. So that would be my recommendation to you, is that you would direct us back to do more work and make reductions and balance the proposed budget before you. I know we talked about this during the work study, and so it's not cold in your minds, but now I would gladly take questions from you all or concerns and maybe what you think next. And Dr. Green, feel free to interject when need be.
Are there any questions or comments from the board for Mr. Cooper?
A question, when you talked about the strengths of the budget as you presented here, you talked about continued collaboration. Can you talk a little bit more about who we've collaborated with to develop the budget and how that process has gone?
Well, our budget in this case is a two-prong, right? So fortunately, we started this work very early. So the March reduction, this is still part of the 24-25 budget process, was all the meetings that we took with every administrator, director, et cetera. The open houses we have with the community. So Dr. Green and I hosted, 3 or 4 between us, open houses for budgetary input and information out. And then we have worked with our labor groups in different forms and fashions, depending upon the timing. So Human Resources, who has the direct contact with labor groups for the most part, we obviously bring them alongside us as much as possible. And then we continue to work with them, particularly on the HR side, when it comes to the effects on their members and what could potentially be next in their financial future. So that would be off the top of my head, Graciela, where the collaboration has occurred. And of course, with you all, when we come to the board room and report out and then do work studies, et cetera. So I would say that would be what's off the top of my head. Dr. Green, am I missing anything?
We know that we have to have the budget approved by August 31.
Yes, ma'am.
By state law. Will there be time between now and then, and hopefully before our August 20 board meeting?
Yes.
To accomplish the work that still needs to be done to get us to a balanced budget?
Yes. So I would recommend that if we're going to make any additional reductions, we do it on the 5th, potentially. And then you would adopt a clean, deficit-free budget on the 20th of August, prior to your statutory deadline.
Thank you.
And the work has been modeled and is ready to go.
And so to achieve, the balanced budget, we're looking for about $3 million. Is that right? Like
Between
the
3 and 4
is the exact amount. Okay.
Ideally, we bring back to you with slight surplus, which would be great. And I think we can achieve that given the current numbers we have. The budget that is going to be brought back to you will have staff reductions and has tight MSOCs. As we talked about during work study, we are in the couch cushions. I said we're in the cushions, and now we're in the springs. That's what we're doing. We're examining, of course, any kind of spend, renegotiating contracts all across the system with our vendors to get better rates, and we're making some good progress there as well. So there will be savings that will not be calculated in the budget provided to you, but there are also additional cost-saving measures that are going to occur throughout the fiscal year. So hopefully we build $3 or $4 million on top of what we're doing now, and we end with 11 or 12 million, because the goal is to continue to reduce spending throughout the fiscal period. So, and then put us on a better trajectory as we build forward next year. We will have reductions again this spring. Those will not be avoided. I don't foresee any revenue or change in our current position that would not require us to do reductions or layoffs in the March period, in that spring period prior to the deadline for certificated staff of May 15th. So just want to go on I often get accused of not being maybe as articulate as I need to be about the multi-year. This is always going to be a multi-year issue. And I want to make sure we go on the record now that there will be reductions or recommended reductions before, and I can't guarantee what the board will do. Recommended reductions for you in the springtime. So We will again balance and use all our tools at our disposal. We are using every tool we have for liquidity and to balance the budget. Every trick and trade I've known for my whole career. I told the superintendent I'm doing all we can. We've met with all different parties for different reasons. So I do want you to know that is all occurring. But again, I would recommend additional reductions before adoption of the budget prior to August 31st. So are there any other questions on the preliminary hearing?
I want to go back to the collaboration question and ask a follow-up to that. Have any of the groups that we've met with, whether it's staff or union representation or the community, brought forth any innovative ideas or potential solutions or things that we haven't considered yet that might help partly save money, balance budget, anything like that?
I'll go ahead and start, and you can chime in if you need. At this point, no, we have not had any ideas around how we can fully balance the budget with the people that we've reached out to. We do continue, as Mr. Cooper mentioned, to look at all types of creative opportunities. And he touched upon a few of those, one being the opportunity for open enrollment at the kinder level all the way up through the entire system, which is new. We have childcare offering, which before and after school, which is another opportunity. Some of these may not pay dividends right away, but they're ways of capturing funding throughout the year. We've done extensive analysis across our special education department. You'll have a report today on our past year, but you also are aware that we have a new executive director coming in, and some of the goals that he has for assuring that we tighten up and are capturing more funding throughout the year. Mr. Cooper did talk about safety net, and he referenced asking for 1.8 million and receiving 1, and that being contingent upon metrics that we meet throughout the year in our special education department. So I will imagine that those will continue to grow. He also mentioned the pass through for Running Start, and I can't tell you how painful it is to pass through over $1 million plus of funding straight onto the local college instead of having that in our system to serve students. So for now, the third year, we're continuing to build upon our AA in the high school program, both through Arizona State and another local university who is on the cusp of being able to announce a 2-year partnership that we've been developing with them that is probably well known already to our high school teachers and participants here, but out of respect for our partnership, we've held off on announcing that on a wide scale. So hopefully that will continue to grow and capture and reverse maybe that Running Start opportunity that is currently escaping us at this moment. We've seen tremendous outcomes in our dual language with our elementary students. So again, with the open enrollment at the elementary level, we're looking to capture more opportunities for students to come into our district, and those who move out and move close by, which happens quite frequently, to stay in their local area and therefore stay as members of our district. You're talking more about collaboration, that component. I would mention that after the budget is approved by the board, that does send a definite signal to our entire community, including our labor partners, of where we're at and where we're headed, and in a board sanctioned approach, which then does open up more venues potentially for greater collaboration moving forward to find ways to be more creative. So I would not say that the door to creative solutions is closed at this point. I think it is actually opening wider for more people to come forward and share those creative ideas of collaborating towards a solution that will help us manage a situation that, as Mr. Cooper mentioned, is happening across our state. I did reach out to OSPI this last week to get an actual count, because I've heard time and time again that multiple districts, and I've said this to many of our partners, that we have districts across the state that are facing similar reduced enrollment and inflationary challenges. So I did reach out to OSPI, and the number that they gave me as far as districts that have declining enrollment from the previous year to the end of this last year are 141 districts. So that gives you an idea of how many districts out there are facing these type of challenges. We also have 5 districts that continue to be in binding conditions. 4 of them are look like there won't be an issue in exiting binding conditions, but 1 is having significant challenges, and many more are slated to go into binding conditions, and we're not currently slated to be one of those. So I think that's what I would just kind of share in opening up the creativity and opportunity that then stands before us once a budgetary adoption is completed. Anything to add, Mr. Cooper?
Only that anytime you continue to reduce, it's difficult on the entire system from the board to the bus driver. I mean, it's not easy. That's something we don't take for granted. My role is to execute these types of measures as your chief financial officer. However, it still is very difficult for people to do. Even when you've been doing it for this many years, it's still hard because we know the impact. However, this is when I put my professional hat on. This is something we have to do and must do for the future of the school district to keep its solvency and make sure that we can serve the kids that are enrolled with us. And so it's difficult, like everything in life, and difficult. I always tell my children this, that if you feel like if you're nauseous and you're nervous, what you're about ready to do or going to do is probably worthwhile. And so I've been nauseous every morning for a month. To that end, it's because the work is hard, and the only way through it is through it. So we have to just keep battling our financial picture and making it better until we come out the other side. So
the other item that I would share within the time frame of final approval that will happen between now and that final board action potentially is the board scheduled retreat that we have August 12th. So on the agenda right now is intentional time to engage with 10 of our department leaders at the request of Director Villanueva as to what is happening across our entire system. We did share metrics through our special education department and what Casey Mitchell was able to come up with and make known widely with the board. And that will happen across multiple departments in that session. So I think that the timing is good for the board to hear more about the steps that are being taken across 10 additional departments within our current context and how that's going to play out and how that has played out so far.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
I have one wrap up. Not seeing you give us any direction and no policy governance, I assume you are okay with us bringing you back a balanced budget on the 20th after work on the 5th? Okay. I need some nodding heads before we proceed.
Yeah, I've shared
Yes.
before, I'm really uncomfortable approving a
Yep.
deficit budget. So I do think there's additional work required to balance the budget.
I agree. I just wanted to make sure that I had confirmation from my board of directors before.
I think from our previous discussions, that was kind of consensus of the board that we would prefer a balanced budget, not a deficit budget.
Agree. Thank you.
Okay, we are now open to public comment regarding the preliminary budget. The same guidelines apply for other comment sections of the program. So are there any public comments on the budget? Okay, no comment on the budget. I will ask again, are there any public comments regarding the preliminary budget? And I will ask a third time, are there any public comments regarding the preliminary budget?
My name's Steve McKenna. Some of you may know me I'm a retired YSD educator, former president of YEA. I'm looking at the budget information, and it's interesting to see it from the back. If you thought it was small from up here, it's very tiny. My master's project was in Yakima School District finances because I got tired of smoke, mirrors, and excuses and all these things. I got into union work because initially I sat in an in-service where it was 95 degrees and was told students learn more when they're more comfortable. And I asked the presenter if they had air conditioning and if they turned it on, because at that time, Davis air conditioning was not functional. Eventually, the board, after the question was brought up about finding money to do it, that I suggested that we turn the air conditioning down here off until we've saved enough. And eventually the money was found. I think part of the issue here is exactly how we got into this situation. And I think the fourth slide on the budget was very informative. In 2019-20, according to your figures, student FTE dropped 65, and certificated FTE dropped 23, and classified FTE dropped 6. That was the first year of our superintendent's position. In the second year, student FTE dropped 411. Certificated FTE increased 36. Classified FTE increased 26.6. The next year, 21-22, student FTE drops 5. Certificated FTE increased 28. Classified FTE increased 19.4. The next year, student FTE drops 283. Certificated FTE increases another 29. Classified FTE increases 57. 23-24, student FTE drops 472. Cert FTE increases 14. Classified FTE increases 10. And it's, wow. If we're talking numbers here, the totals we dropped 1,236 FTE, and then of students, while hiring 107 more certificated FTE and 113 more classified FTE. That's how we got into this picture, because we hired way too many people for the numbers of students that we had. And now we're having to lay them off. And we've laid off more than any surrounding district, more as a percentage of the staff, and you're going to be laying off more next year. And the board needs to understand some of those figures that are flashed by you very quickly, because they have consequences on the lives of people that are working here and getting riffed and put in jeopardy. So I'll be back in August to give you some more detailed comments of why you're in this situation.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments regarding the preliminary budget? Okay, as there are no more comments from the public, I officially close the public hearing for the preliminary 24-25 budget. Next up on our agenda, we have a report from Special Education Services to the board. Mr. Mitchell, our new Executive Director of Special Education. Superintendent Green, did you want to make a brief introduction?
I think we can just move right in, as we've heard from him previously, and I kind of gave him a pre-introduction here a few minutes ago. I will simply add that I am excited about Mr. Mitchell's leadership and the way that he has embraced this opportunity. Challenges certainly are opportunities, and he is certainly in this position for the right reasons, wanting to make the biggest impact for students, families, and staff. So thank you, and I would also call out that he is giving an update on our past status with our special education department, not moving forward. So I look forward to his future presentations of what happens under his leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Green. Thank you, board members for having me here today. I appreciate the opportunity to get to share a little bit about where we were last year. As you know, I was serving in a different role, but I will take questions at the end and will do my best to answer those questions. And if I cannot, I will get back to you with an answer. So wanted to set that up in the beginning. I believe you have the slides, and so I will take you just through a few of the slides. We won't be seeing all the slides tonight, but certainly if you have questions, please let me know. So I do want to talk about our special education department. We serve just over 2,400 students. I would describe our department as robust. In fact, I think it's one of the most robust in the valley and the area. I think that it is something we can be proud of. We serve a lot of students and we serve them well. We have great staff, we have good people, and so I appreciate the work that those folks do. We serve settings from resource rooms all the way to classrooms that serve students with multiple disabilities. And that also includes services that are sometimes kind of forgotten, but we have vision services, services for the deaf, physical therapy, and it goes on from there. So I would again say that we have robust services in Yakima School District, and I think it's something we can be proud of. When we look at some of the achievement data, we will see that this slide shows us the 21-22, or excuse me, the 2021, 21-22, and 22-23 school years. You can see that it's listed from the top down SES and non-SES students, and this is looking at both the SBAC and the WA-AIM, and you can see the WA-AIM is described there for you. It is an off-grade level alternative assessment, which may only be given to about 1% of our special education students. So when you look at those percentages, you will see that we have some work to do. We have some work to do. You will notice that in 22-23 school year, we had about 9% of our students passing the SBAC English or SBA English versus 35.7% of our non-SES students. You can see the way WA-AIM alternative assessment is listed there with a higher percentage. Mathematics SBA, you can see again 5.9% versus 21.5%. WA-AIM listed below. And then the WA-CAS, which is science, is 7% passing, that with about 30.6% passing for our non-SES students. So, and then the WA-AIM assessment listed below that. So again, work to do. I think there's growth. I believe we have good systems that we'll be working on and have systems in place that will really help us grow this over time. If we look at the next slide, we can see this is looking at the overall graduation rates for our students. So we have trends from 2017, 2018, all the way to 22-23 for graduation. And it's a little bit hard to read, but we have the overall graduation rate at the top. The next row is our students with different abilities. You can see the graduation rates there. Non-students with different abilities. And then we can see a disparity. One of the things that you will notice is that when we look at 22-23, we do see a fairly substantial increase in the graduation rate for our students with different abilities. And then consequently, you'll see a drop in the disparity rate, 11 percentage points. So I think that's something to be proud of and something that, of course, we would like to see that trend continue as we move forward.
Casey, this is based on the data that OSPI has, correct?
That is correct, yep. And so there is a little connection there. You can find where we got the data. So if you click on that, you're able to find that data.
But they haven't published this year's graduation yet, right?
We haven't seen that yet. Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Otherwise, I would have shared it with you today.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So then another slide that I think is important is for us to look at the least restrictive environment slide, or our LRE as we refer to it, again, another acronym. So our LRE, we have 3 different levels. We have level 1, and you can see that that's most of your time is, greatest proportion of your time as a student with different abilities is spent in general education classroom. You will see with LRE 2, it's 40 to 79% spent. And then LRE 3, which is really the most restrictive environment, that is when we have 0 to 39% of our time for students is spent with the general ed students. What you will see is that LRE 1, we're a little bit below where the state is at. We'd like to see that increase over time. I'll talk about that in just a moment, about how we're working on making that happen. LRE 2, we are a little bit above where the state is, so with the 25.5%. So students spending 40 to 79% of their time. And then with LRE 3, you will see that we are actually about 10% off of where the state average is for LRE 3. This really comes down to some of the topics of the day, which the state talks about inclusion. And so the increase in inclusion is something we would like to see happen over time. And so with increased inclusion, we would see over time, we anticipate that those numbers will begin to change as we include, are able to increase our inclusion. Working on inclusion, we are able, we have a 3-year professional learning recommendation or plan that we've been following. We worked in collaboration this last year with YEA. I had a little bit of work that I was able to do with our association, our Teachers Association, with that, and I appreciated the work that they were able to help with and continue to help with moving forward. You can see that we had a year 0, which was our first year, a planning year, and there was a work team that was put together. Really to design what would it look like if we improved inclusion for students across our system. And so they came up with a plan that you see here. So we are in year 1 this coming school year. And really the big part of year 1 is the special education 101 training for all YSD certificated staff. So we will be offering that. It's happening August 20th. Mark your calendars if you'd like to learn about special education. August 20th is the day. We'd love to see members or directors there. That'd be awesome if you wanted to come and see that. I appreciate our partners in YEA. Thank you very much, Franny. I'm looking at you. Thank you for working with us on that. Also our partners in human resources for helping us make that happen as well. So that will be the start of the process. And then you can see in year 2, we'll be looking at special education in more detail. What are the programs? What are the continuum of services? All those things listed there. And then in year 3, really looking at inclusionary education, universal design for learning, monitoring student progress, and increasing, as I said, LRE 1 in alignment with OSPI expectations. So we anticipate through this 3-year plan that we will begin to see greater inclusion for all of our students. And those numbers you saw on the last slide, we should see some change. So,
Casey, do we have a goal that we're shooting for percentage of students that are included in the general ed classes, or is it just depends on our population?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. Thank you, Director Rice. I would say that working with our partners, we would like to eventually set a goal and make sure that we have a goal for the inclusion. I think if we looked back at the last slide, generally speaking, what we would like to see over time is listed in the last column there.
So the state average.
We would like to get to the state average, and that is where we would like to get over time, working with our partners.
Thank you.
And then finally, special education focus. I've had an opportunity. I want to thank Deputy Superintendent Locke for giving me the opportunity. I know she's watching somewhere right now, so this is a shout out to you where you're at. I've had an opportunity to spend some time and work with cabinet, talk with a lot of staff, had some chances to talk with the folks that work in the department. And so there are 3 things that we really want to focus on this next year moving forward. The first one, and I shared these at the board retreat, so I'll cover them pretty quickly, or the work study session a couple of weeks ago. First one is IEP compliance. And so that was mentioned during the budget process. We want to make sure that we are providing on-time and accurate information to families. It is something that is the right thing to do, first of all. Secondly, it does meet federal and state regulation and rules, laws around IEP compliance and making sure that our IEPs are in compliance. The second one is, we did talk about, there is in our speech and language services, we see that compared to like districts, we have a higher percentage. And so really those are the things we'd like to do with that, is working with our SLPs. We anticipate that we will assess the cause for those rates of qualification. Not that students don't deserve that, and not that that qualification isn't very valid, but taking a look at that. And then working with our SLPs to create a consistent system for YSD SLPs and the work that gets done there. And then finally, looking at the one-on-one services, we do have a high percentage of one-on-ones. The state really does view this as the most restrictive environment, having an adult with you all day. Some people tell me that I should probably have an adult with me most of the day. That's a joke for you, Kim Newell. But really, when we look at one-on-one services, that is something that is pretty restrictive. So we will assess the cause for those service rates. Again, it's a fine balance between realizing that students do need those things, and then figuring out what can we do to help them to get out of that most restrictive environment. So it's a fine balance. And then create a consistent system for the acquisition, monitoring, and as appropriate, when the IEP team decides, discontinuation, and then we will implement that system. And so those are the things that we're really going to be working on. I'm lucky I have a strong team with me, and we've been working on that this summer. I look forward to working with the CTL team throughout the course of the school year. That's the team of educators that come and meet on a regular basis as we look at these things and look at the other issues and concerns, and also areas for growth for the department. So I appreciate the opportunity. And then finally, I guess I do have one more slide here. Are there any questions? And I will do my best to answer those.
I have one question regarding speech and language services.
Yes, sir.
I know that one of the challenges, and it's a statewide challenge, is finding enough qualified professionals. And
Yes,
part of
sir.
that issue also has to do with lack of graduate programs to train those professionals. Is there any kind of statewide movement to really address that issue?
I have to tell you, being new in the role, I can't answer that question. What I can do is try to find out an answer for you. I will tell you that it is something that we constantly seek for speech and language SLPs. I tell you what, my daughter is thinking about going into education. I'm like, become an SLP. You will have a job for life, my friend. So, but I think that it is something we are working hard on to make sure that we have the coverage. The best plan would be to have somebody in person, right? But we do have programs where we do some teletherapy, as we call it. So,
yeah. And the other one's just kind of a hopeful comment.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I'm hopeful about the movement to train regular classroom teachers in how to be more effective with inclusionary practices, and that includes effective behavior management. And I think also that can also tie into the need for one-to-one services. I think our tendency sometimes is when we are met with a student with severe behavioral challenges, our solution is let's just get them a one-on-one. Let's just get them a one-on-one, which does not, it's a loss for our student and for our teacher in order to make that student function in the classroom.
Yeah, I really do look forward. I mean this wholeheartedly. I'm saying in front of the board, I really look forward to working with the association, Yakima Education Association, as we build that plan over time. So,
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for?
I do have a question. I'm looking at one of the slides that you didn't show us on the screen, but that's in our package, the special education compliance data. I appreciate that this is here and appreciate the progress that's being made here in working towards that compliance. My question is maybe actually for Mr. Cooper, maybe for you as well. So I'm linking back one of the comments that was made where we applied for 1.8 million in funding in special education programs and only got 1 million. Is that tied to our compliance rate of IEPs? And if we had full compliance, would we have gotten 1.8 million?
Casey, I'll give it a go. And you want to?
yeah, I can take it or you can. How about I'll start?
I'll fill in if need be.
Okay. How about I'll start? So there are some issues when we turn in for the safety net. We then get from that group a list of concerns that they have about our application, the things that we have applied for. We then go back, and I want to say our office manager and Rosa did a wonderful job. So I know you're sitting there, but they did a wonderful job tracking those things down and getting them the information they need so we can get as much money as possible back, because we know that it's not funded the way it should be, right? And so with that, what we did find was that some of the issues we have are in the IEP compliance realm. So as Mr. Cooper said, are some of our goals written in a way that the state wants to see them? Did we get the annual review done in a timely manner? You know, those things all play into whether we get the full dollar amounts. I think we have already met several times as a department to talk about, I think they get tired of, I always say, let's have a meeting. We have met several times to talk about for this next year, how do we make sure that we take the lessons learned from those things that we didn't do, perhaps that cost us getting the full amount. What can we do with those lessons in the future, this coming school year, to make sure that we are getting as much money back as possible through that safety net funding? So it is, you're exactly right. There is a tie between the two. It is not a one-on-one. And so there are other issues that happen with that as well. But this next year, we will be providing professional development to staff on Mondays. Our special education staff, we've had a team of teachers that have helped us develop that for this coming school year on IEP and IEP compliance in specifically. So we anticipate that that'll grow over time. So, and I just want to thank the staff. They did a wonderful job, and they took a new guy and really helped him understand it. So I appreciate my staff. I don't know if I covered it enough.
That was good. I'm just saying that you can have an IEP that's technically compliant for state funding that does not meet the funding threshold for the safety net committee. Because there's more, the standards for safety net funding are more onerous than just compliant for state funding. Because it's not a measurable goal. It goes into the full details of the IEP, where a compliant IEP for funding means meeting was held, valid IEPs in place, etc. So it's not mutually exclusive, I guess. So
it is stringent to get those dollars.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you so much.
I appreciate the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we have updates from members of the board.
The period of time for suggested amendments to the legislative proposals that were submitted last spring opens, I think, on the 1st for a week or 10 days. And then there will be, that after that closes, then WASDA staff will go through a process of trying to measure and evaluate each of the any of the suggestions that come forward and see if there are conflicting ones, if they can reach resolution on those conflicts or not. And then those amended proposals will also be included in the handbook that is right now out in draft form and can be found on the WASDA website. The final handbook will be issued after all of the amendments are resolved or not. And that will trigger the production of the final handbook for the General Assembly, which is coming up at the end of September.
Thank you. Any other reports from the board? Okay, moving on, we have our superintendent's update.
Thank you, President Walker, member of the boards. I'm pleased to share with you some wonderful things that are happening around collaboration regarding an approach to address inadequate state funding. President Walker and I have been part of a 4-district approach to draft an op-ed for Seattle Times, and you do have that in front of you. That is a rough draft that is being worked on currently, as I said, with four districts around the state, and that should be finalized relatively soon. I share that first, and second, I will talk to you a little bit about our continued work with the University of Washington and superintendents from around the state. You also have in front of you a rough draft authored by David Knight, who is a funding and policy expert out of the University of Washington, regarding a convening that I had mentioned earlier on in the month. This happened at the beginning of July, and the group will continue to convene. But being the researcher that he is, he's already put together a publishable document on our work to address state funding and the need for it to take on a different approach and different model that is equitable. So I wanted you to have access to both of those documents, letting you know that they are not in their finalized state. And as soon as they are, I will give you the final copies and we'll upload those onto board docs as well. In addition, I would like to share that I am working on an op-ed that is currently in the hands of the Seattle Times that is not around state funding, that is more focused towards safety and security, as there was a outreach from the Seattle Times regarding the work that we're doing here in the Yakima School District to place safety first and foremost in the minds of our staff members in our community and in our students as well. And the expedited need for this is because there is a continued escalation around violence that we're seeing in the Seattle area, and of course, being in that metro area, it takes on a larger significance with the Seattle Times. So hopefully it will meet the standards of the Seattle Times and come out relatively soon, or at least before the start of school or thereabout. Other information to share with you simply is that we have a partnership also with the Teachers Access Foundation, TAF, and they're interested in collaborating with our leadership at a no cost to them or to the district to provide some development around co-collaborated opportunities to address equitable opportunities in our district. So that is just in the initial stages, and I'll look forward to having another report out for you on that as well. And 2 final items, one being that I don't have information from Davis as of yet, but I did meet with Principal Diner at Eisenhower today, and he was very excited to share with me the amount of college and the high school courses through Eastern Washington University and Central Washington University, and had actually figured out the number of credits earned and the total savings to our families. And currently the totals that he has through Eastern Washington University, 235 students participating, 747 credits earned, and a total savings to our families on tuition of $242,102.70. Through the University of Washington, through the Central Washington University program, we're looking at a total of 129 students with 645 credits earned and a savings of $209,044.50. So that is not something that comes back to the district, but it is a service that we are providing for our students. Combining, it's almost 450,000, just thereabout, just over that amount for our families, and providing those opportunities to move forward with their education. So it's something of which we're very proud, and especially as we work towards an AA in the high school model, where students will be leaving high school with that actual certificate in hand that will become more transferable to universities, instead of the work that is currently happening from person to person trying to figure out what is eligible for transfer and what is not. So we continue to make great gains, and I believe that those numbers will continue to grow. Are there any questions about anything that I've mentioned thus far before I?
Are those the numbers for this last school year?
These are the numbers for 23-24, yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I did reach out to him just at the beginning of this meeting to find out if he has numbers, how far back those numbers go, because I would be interested in knowing what our savings is over the course of the start of our programs with the AA and the high school opportunities.
Can you remind me how we pay for that?
Yes,
The
currently
credits.
the legislature is paying for college and high school courses. So by moving to an internal state partner at the university level, those are entirely funded. Running Start is funded now, and college and high school. So for us, we would be better served financially, and I believe for the majority of our students to be able to participate in a high school AA and high school model that does result in that same AA degree without leaving our current environment. With the wraparound supports that we do have, the ability to participate in high school, in a traditional high school experience without leaving campus. It doesn't preclude, as you know, and you saw from the numbers, we do have students at what I would say is an alarming rate taking advantage of Running Start. But I think as we grow, we continue to grow this program, and especially as we get to that final mark of actually having that AA and announcing it officially, which again has not happened and has not been widely celebrated at the state level. It's just more of an internal knowledge of just due to our partner right now and the challenges that our partner has within the state politically, because this engagement, this partnership that we do have, does have repercussions at the higher ed level that are still being navigated. I'm sorry to speak in a little bit of code there, but I've already said too much. Yeah. Any other questions before my final comments and my update? Okay, then the last item I wanted to share just simply is more of a commentary, and I do appreciate the report that Mr. Cooper gave, and I'm actually really excited that we had visitation of Steve McKenna. So I'm glad that he was here, glad I'm able to acknowledge him in being here. What I did hear from him was actually there was not a opposition to or recognition that the budget is being misappropriated. So I appreciate that support of having a balanced budget. And I'd like to clarify one item that he did mention, or that I heard, which was that surrounding districts are not having the same reduction repercussions that we have. And that is completely untrue. So as we look around the different districts, there are many districts that are going through the same. And I think that what is happening public-wise is we are the largest district. We are the one that leads the headlines. And when you look at some of the smaller districts that maybe don't capture as much headlines, such as a Highland or a Mabton, the amount of loss of revenue that they're facing and the percentage of absorption and reduction combined are beyond what we faced. But we do garner the most attention. So I just did want to clarify that. And then lastly, I would invite anybody in the audience that would be interested, anybody watching. I've never turned anyone down from meeting and having some clarification of where we are budget-wise. We've held open sessions with the public, as referenced earlier by Mr. Cooper, and that is full open to the public, and any question can be asked and clarified, which is a great venue for doing that. I would invite, since he was the only individual that spoke, Mr. McKenna does have my cell number from when he was previously in his position as president of YEA, and I would invite him as a community member to certainly come in and we can have a more robust conversation about where we're at and why we're where we're at, which has been shared widely in other sessions and other meetings that we've had, including the public. So that stands for any individual. I'll even meet with people out of district, as I've done from people from West Valley that have come in asking for clarification. It's only about asking and being willing to listen and sit and give those ideas. So you did come up earlier, Director, you mentioned earlier, Director Villanueva. What are we doing? We are very open about being able to meet and taking into consideration all of those ideas. And that has never been something that's been off the table with any of our community members or any of our employees at any time. So I just wanted to reiterate that and extend that invitation to the public in a more formal setting. So we will make time because we are here to serve our community and serve our students first and foremost. So with that, I'll turn the time back over to President Norm Walker.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick, brief calendar update. Of course, our next meeting is the August 12th board retreat, but I have in front of me 3 different locations for that. I have Davis High School on one document. I have the Learning Center on North 39th Avenue on one document, and I have here at Central Services on another document. So I need some clarification on where we'll be holding our retreat.
Certainly, and you mentioned it's the board retreat, right? That's what you
board
mentioned?
retreat on August 12th.
Yeah.
August 12th.
Yeah, so the board retreat is going to be at Davis.
It's at Davis,
Yes,
okay.
so that will be updated and finalized. We have been vacillating between which area to use. Part of that board retreat session will take a short mini venture into the auditorium because we do want the board to see the completed structure before the opening day ceremony. We know that many of you, if all of you, have not been in the final completed auditorium. I know we have Kyle Soptic. Please put your hand up right there. He'll be taking us on that tour, which will include seeing the lights and how they work and also hearing the sound of that facility. So because of that location, we have moved the retreat to Davis, and that has been difficult as well because we have band camp going on, so we haven't finalized an exact location, but it will be at Davis.
Great. I just wanted to show up at the right place.
And that is open to the public as well.
Okay, thank you. And then obviously August 20th is our next board business meeting, and that will be here. So that's the only calendar, the 20th, August 20th.
And there's a meeting on August 5th, right?
August 5th,
I
yes.
see that on here too.
That's the next immediate meeting.
Okay.
And that's here. Okay, that's it for calendar updates. Mr. Cooper, we welcome you back to provide our monthly financial update.
Thank you, President Walker, members of the board. This evening for your consideration is the monthly financial update. So required by state statute, the board must have a receipt of the monthly budget status report as the months are reconciled. The only exception to that is you get it every month except when we're closing the books, and then you get a couple of budget status reports in October. So otherwise monthly. So nothing new in this presentation, the same statistics as prior. It is important to June. June is now the low cash flow month for school districts across the state of Washington. We talked about this during your retreat. Remember, the state has changed how they apportion money, and you get 23% of your apportionment in July and August. And I think that June payment is what, 6.5 or 7? So a significantly less amount of cash in June. Remember, that was done not too recently because, again, the state pushes things around their fiscal year. So sometimes that July and June can have dramatic impacts for us depending upon the biennium. So again, out of interest, I have been below enrollment projection the entire year. Nothing changed there. And then as we discussed earlier, we now have clean federal financial and accountability audits for fiscal year 23-24. Our audit is 400 or 500 hours on site, and then we received 2 audit reports, one on the financial and federal, which reviews your internal controls and the proper creation and disclosure of your financial statements, and then the second is compliance with state law and policies and procedures, including your Open Public Meetings Act, which was audited by the auditor this cycle, and of course there was no issues there. So Our enrollment trend, as we've discussed, I will not belabor this graph. We have looked at it many times. The enrollment was referenced during the budget report. This is a slightly different look because we have 1920 versus 2324. But again, different, even though it's a different time horizon. If you look at October of 2019-20 at 15.9 and our current October at 15,095, you can see there's approximately 900 student decline from October to October. And then, of course, it depends upon the point in time of reference where you measure our decline or peak in enrollment. I believe graphically it's in fiscal year 16-17 or 17-18, and we may have crested enrollment just at that 16,000 number. Graphical representation, we talked about enrollment versus budget versus actual, very flat. Apologies, I'm going to have to change how I graphically represent that. It's clear to the reader. Budget versus actual comparisons. Again, the teal bar on the right are the actuals for the year, and the black bar is the budget. So you can see this is a revenue comparison. Some months are greater and less than projection. Of course, we are still, again, moving forward with the fiscal year, and due to our overprojected enrollment, even though we did reduce to ameliorate that effect, you're still going to be slightly less than projected enrollment. And of course, we will be less than projected expenditures as well, but have a slight draw in fund balance greater than projected. Budget versus actual and total expenditures. Again, same graphical representation. Black bar is the budget. Blue bar are the teal bar are the actuals. I think about half of those months are below projection and about half above. Cash flow. So this is always the most important thing for me. If there's anything important for a governing body to look at, it's enrollment, it's staffing levels, and it's cash position. So the cash position, you can see green is projected, blue is actual. We've talked about the humps and the trough. So school districts, for the most part, taxes in October and April, and then the trough in the middle, and then the fiscal year end, which has changed over the last few cycles given the volatility in the apportionment. So we are positive, obviously, in cash in this June in particular. But again, many districts around the state, I've heard a handful that had to take bridge loans during the June period to be able to make payroll due to their cash position. So that's, of course, something we have to monitor going forward based on our liquidity and cash, overall cash. Materials, supplies, and operating costs. We talked about our acronyms before. This can be a rather volatile graph depending upon if we have a large curriculum purchase in any given period, etc. And what you saw, some of that is in September. We would have large accruals for the curriculum purchase. So at the start of the year, there was big chunks of purchase in September. And then, of course, our MSOCs have kind of bobbed along versus budget. And we have also put spending freezes on in certain areas during the end of the fiscal year. So we should see that MSOC number drop by the end of 8/31, which is a good thing, which will bolster our cash position. ESSER, we've talked about many times. ESSER 3, you can see there is 700,000 in total left. Those amounts will be drawn down and completely gone with one of the final payments for Discovery Early Learning. That will be completed. And then the last, or one of the final payments, never mind, that's not in here. That's in the capital projects. Those two expenses will be rounded out with Discovery Early Learning and be completely gone. So ESSER will no longer be on the books. We are required by federal law or current guidance to have those funds fully expended by 9/30/24, which we will do. Any questions on ESSER 3? In learning recovery, we have fully expended those funds last cycle for the most part, our large-scale curriculum purchases is one example. And then intercessions and other items we used during the pandemic and immediately post-pandemic to increase opportunities for students learning. And, of course, that would be the last slide in the deck. Any questions on your monthly financial report? I know you already got a report on the budget and something we do every month, but again, cash position of utmost importance, and then your enrollment and staffing levels. Let's keep those in the front of your mind. Any questions from the board? Okay, thank you.
No questions. Thank you for a clear and concise report. Okay, next up we have our second opportunity for comments from the public, and this is comments on agenda items only. Are there any takers?
There are none.
There are none. Moving on, we have a consent agenda. And within the consent agenda, we have approval of minutes of previous meetings, notification of approval of warrants for the month of June, approval of personnel actions, and approval of the budget status reports for June. Is there any need for removal of a consent agenda item for further discussion? Seeing none, do I hear a motion?
I move adoption of the consent agenda as submitted.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the consent agenda. Any other discussion? Barb, would you take the roll, please?
Director Beckett?
Aye.
Director Rice?
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva? President Walker?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you. Next up, we have approval of the PSE agreement. Chris Miller from Human Resources will present that report.
Good evening, board. Thank you for having me up here today. I'm subbing in for Anthony Marietta, who's out, and presenting this resolution for potential approval. So right now we are requesting an action that the board of directors approves the agreement between the public school employees of Yakima Food Service and Yakima School District. This is in alignment with goal number 2 of our strategic plan. The fiscal impact for this, the salary for the 2023-24 school year, will see an increase of $107,168.44 effective the 2024-25 school year. The adjustments for the following year's IPD will be subject to determination by the legislature. For some background information, bargaining with the public school employees of Yakima Food Service has completed, resulting in a 3-year agreement. This would include the 2024 through 2027 school years. For the 2024-25 year, there's an increase to base wage to include IPD 3.7% plus 0.3% for a total of 4%. For the 2025-26 year, there's an increase to the base wage of IPD, which is to be decided by the legislature still, or 3%, whichever is higher. And for the 2026-27 year, there's an increase to the base wage of IPD or 3%, whichever is higher. The district and union's bargaining teams met, discussed, and reached a tentative agreement. The public school employees of the Yakima Food Service voted on June 17th, 2024, to ratify the agreement, and the district bargaining team is now seeking board of director approval to complete the process. Specifically, we do want to extend thank you to the district bargaining team. It's Anthony Marietta, Olivia Martinez, Chris Miller. It's weird thanking yourself. Thanks, Shake. Cassie Davidson, Marcia Wagner, and Payaluk Harankau. For our public school employees, the Yakima Food Service bargaining team, we have Kim Yates, Michelle Wirtz, Candace Decio, and Teresa Higby. Thank you.
Do I hear a motion from the board to approve the bargaining agreement with our PSE employees?
I move adoption of the labor agreement between the public school employees of Yakima Food Services and the Yakima School District as submitted.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve this bargaining agreement. Any other discussion or question? Okay, thank you. Barb, would you call the roll, please?
I just want to thank Chris and the team for bringing us this agreement, and the fact that it's a 3-year agreement is an extra bonus. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you. And I'd like to pass those accolades on to the PSE bargaining team as well. It was a very collaborative effort. So thank you, Director Rice.
I think you took the words right out of my mouth. But I'd also, while you mentioned that, I had the privilege of actually seeing the actual agreement, and it was really a nice collaborative effort to clean up a lot of language and provided some real benefits to our employees, and really did a nice job by everybody involved. So that said, will we take the vote?
Director Beckett?
Aye.
Director Rice?
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva?
Aye.
President Walker?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you. Next up, we will welcome Superintendent Green discussing our purchase of some diesel school buses.
I love the emphasis of diesel. Thank you very much for doing that. It was not lost on me. So the requested action is the Board of Directors approves a purchase for diesel buses from Shetke in the amount of $1,494,607. As the board may recall, there was an approval that came forward at the beginning of the month for 3 buses, and this is for an additional 4. We did nullify the previous request, even though it was approved, because of the error of listing those as electric buses. So hence the emphasis of diesel. These are diesel vehicles. The background information is the RCW 28A 335.190 requires the board to solicit bids for items or work that exceeds $75,000. But we are allowed to school districts and ESTs to purchase school buses from vendors who submit an acceptable bid through the state. This purchase will replace buses in our fleet as they are past their useful life and have increased the cost of maintenance and major repairs. So we are coming forward with a larger request, combining the 3 with an additional 4. 3 of the buses would be anticipated to arrive relatively soon at the beginning of 24-25, with the additional 4 buses arriving at the end of this entered school year.
Okay, thank
Any
you.
questions?
Any questions from the board?
Just some clarification for our viewing community who may wonder why we're cutting positions and then buying buses. Jake, maybe you could provide some clarification on the differentiation.
Yes, I'm Director Rice, and as was discussed during the budget presentation, that school district in Washington State operate on different funds, or fund accounting or governmental accounting, and each fund in Washington State has specific purposes or statute, underlying statute that regulate what can be spent. The Transportation Vehicle Fund is just that. It can only be used for the purchase of school buses and or the major rebuild, as we discussed earlier. And remember that the state and how it is funded is we buy a school bus like we're doing now. And then on a large bus, they would repay that over a 10 or 12-year period. So that's simple math, $100,000 bus, you would get $10,000 a year until that's come back. And then you would be able to restart the bus purchase. So occasionally you do have to do a levy to put more funds in to buy the buses. But again, once you get it started, it's kind of on a circular state funding cycle. So that's where we're at now. But again, those are separate funds, kind of like bonds. I would say bonds are for building and levies are for learning. Same thing on capital proceeds for the most part. You cannot fund teacher salaries, et cetera. So same statutory.
Thank you.
Thanks for that clarification. Do I hear a motion to approve the purchase of 7 buses?
I move that we approve the purchase of 7 diesel buses from Shetke in the amount of $1,494,607.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to purchase 7 buses. Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, Laura, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett?
Aye.
Director Rice?
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva?
Aye.
President Walker?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you. Now we welcome back Mr. Cooper to discuss Resolution 06.23.24 regarding emergency apportionment advancement.
Sure. Thank you, members of the board. So before you, as we talked about, we have liquidity or cash flow issues. We do have a budget that ends with a positive fund balance, which is a requirement, not to end in binding conditions. However, we are going to have to deploy different tools and strategies to make sure that we have sufficient monthly cash flow. As you can see graphically, and we've talked about, our cash often goes in 2 big waves, in a trough and a wave. So a tool that you have as a school district, and there are not very many left currently to help you with liquidity, is that you can get your apportionment sooner. So if you would, instead of spreading it out, you then get the cash up front. Then you have the full school year to repay that over time. we have a cash crunch in September for the most part, as we make payment on a huge amount of optional days and the start of school year expenditures, and also our insurance premium we talked about. Those bills are often due that first month of September, and we run a rather large accounts payable that month. Usually run $4 million a month. That month we run nine and a half-ish, and then we also have some significant payroll expenses we talked about, because a lot of the optional days that certificated staff work are then paid out in September. So there's 9 optional days. Not all of them are paid in September, but a big chunk of them are paid for the work that happened to get school started in August. So we have a positive fund balance we talked about. What this does, in the way the resolution is structured, is that it makes you do a cash flow analysis, and then you can pick the month with the largest negative balance. So the resolution before you, that's not a running total. That would be so it's not like your 4.3 million, 2.6 million. If you put cash upstream in that resolution, it makes those other amounts positive. It's not a running negative total. It's actually the cash below zero. So the goal would be, and this isn't up to, and we would make this decision after October enrollment comes in. So I've talked to OSPI and received their technical approval, is that we would then ask for an apportionment advance and the amount we need to cover our liquidity for September and October. So that is what's before you this evening. Not only as your job as CFO is to provide you with budgetary guidance and reductions and additions, etc. My goal is also to mitigate your risk, and part of that is not being in a cash position to be able to execute payables and payroll. So to that end, we're going to deploy tools that are not used very often. This will be one of them. I believe last year there was 30 to 40 districts that requested an apportionment advancement. I would imagine that number is going to continue to grow. So this is a tool for liquidity. We may or may not exercise the resolution, but we need these in place to start the school year in case we need to draw down early and be able to help us with our cash position. So that is what's before you this evening. Superintendent Green and I have had conversations with the senior OSPI staff. They help to structure the resolution. And of course, it's here for your consideration this evening. Are there any other questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board?
If the board passes a balanced budget, would we still need this?
Yes.
Is there any situation in which we wouldn't need this?
No, not currently.
Okay. If for whatever reason we found we didn't need it, do we have the option of not using it?
Yes.
So this gives us the option of, okay.
It is not a must do. It is we can do.
Can do. Okay.
And anytime we can tap cash that we need when we are cash poor, it is very prudent for us to have it as a tool. And this is likely not the final tool I'll bring to you to help us with our cash situation.
Mr. President, I move approval of Resolution 06.23.24, petition for emergency apportionment advance.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve Resolution 06.23.24. Any other questions or discussion? Barb, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett?
Aye.
Director Rice?
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva?
Aye.
President Walker?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you and your continued trust in providing us with the tools needed to manage our current cash position. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And now we have arrived at our last opportunity of the evening for comments from the public, and this can be on any item not on the agenda. Are there any other requests for comment?
Not at this time.
Not at this time. Thank you. Okay, next up we have approval of policies. And these were all policies that we went through on June 24th. We received surveys on these. We surveyed on all of these. The 2.2, 2.0, and 2.4 policies have to do with superintendent's compliance with policies. 4.3, 4.2, 4.4, and 0550 have to do with board compliance. All of those were meant fully compliant on all levels at 100% of the people responding to the survey. If you wish to look through the details in those, it's in board documents, but I would recommend a motion that we just approve those in one vote.
I move that the board approve monitoring reports for Policy 0550, 1000.2.0, 1000.2.2, 1000.2.4, 1000.4.2, 1000.4.3, and 1000.4.4 as is allowed in our policy directives.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the previous cited policies. Any other question or discussion? Okay, Barb, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett?
Aye.
Director Rice?
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva?
Aye.
President Walker?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, next up, executive session. I believe there's a need for executive session. No, there isn't. Okay. No longer a need for executive session this evening. Anything else for the good of the order? I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all for coming.